Hello, I'm Bretton, one of our MCAT tutors here at Inspira Advantage, where he helps students get accepted into medical school and other professional programs. And welcome back to another episode of MCAT Bites. In this video, we'll be exploring the critical processes of implementation and menstruation, two essential topics for understanding reproductive biology on the MCAT. You can expect this topic to get you a few points on the Biochem section, so you'll definitely want to make sure you're taking good Anki notes during this video. And I've got a question at the end that'll help make sure you're retaining what you need to retain. But let's jump right on into it. Implementation is the process by which a fertilized egg, now called a blastocyst, attaches to the uterine wall and begins to develop into an embryo. This process typically occurs 6 to 12 days after fertilization. For successful implementation to occur, the uterine lining, a receptive state. This receptivity is primarily mediated by the hormones estrogen and progesterone, which are secreted by the ovaries. Estrogen promotes the proliferation of the endometrium, while progesterone stimulates the secretory phase, preparing the endometrium for potential implementation. Let's break it down with this diagram here. So we'll say day one is when we get fertilized. So from our previous videos, you'll remember we've got the polar body, which is not going to do anything, and we've got some pronuclei in the center. Almost immediately, it's going to begin cleaving and form what we call a blastomere. By day three, we start to compact. We're forming tight cell junctions between the individual cells. This is allowing the cells to all share nutrients and communicate with each other very quickly. By day four, we begin to start seeing some differentiation. These are no longer just clonal cells. By day five, we begin cavitation. So we've got a trophoblast on the side, we have the blastocelic cavity, and an inner cell mass, which is made up of differentiated cells. Day six, we see the zona hatching. You don't need to worry about that term. And at day seven, the zona begins actually implanting. And it's going to go stick itself to the uterine epithelium. Because if it doesn't do this, it's not going to get enough nutrients to survive. By day nine, we've got full differentiation between the three primary layers. We've got our trophoblast, our hypoblast, and our epiblast. The bilayer disc will form, and now we start using terms you'll actually know. We are forming our endoderm, our mesoderm, and our ectoderm. Ectoderm on the outside, of course, mesoderm on the middle, and endoderm will be the inside, ultimately forming the different tubes in our bodies. By 18, we see the mesoderm is starting to spread, and 23, the umbilical cord becomes very visible, the amniotic sac begins enlarging, and we actually have an embryo and a little protodigestive tract. Now, you don't need to memorize all of these details for the MCAT. It's just helpful to know what's going on. Really, you just want to understand that the polar body does nothing. The cell will differentiate into the ectoderm, mesoderm, endoderm, and that's it. Now, if fertilization and implementation do not occur, the corpus luteum, which is the remnant of the ovarian follicle that released the egg, begins to degenerate. As a result, progesterone and estrogen levels decline, triggering the onset of menstruation. And we made a whole video on menstruation that I suggest you check out, but a brief overview is that menstruation, also known as the menstrual period, is the shedding of the endometrium through the vagina. This process typically lasts 3 to 7 days and marks the beginning of a new menstrual cycle. Menstruation occurs when the decline in progesterone and estrogen levels cause the endometrial lining to break down and slow off. Understanding how these hormones are signaling are super important, and luckily we just released a video on that, so go check it out. Now let's reinforce these concepts with an example problem. A woman experiences a lighter than normal menstrual flow and suspects she might be pregnant. Which of the following hormones would be elevated if implementation had occurred? FSH, LH, HCG, or prolactin? And this is a tricky question because we didn't specifically talk about HCG, but let's walk through FSH and LH first. Well, if we look at our graph, if we had implanted, we might expect to see our FSH and LH relatively high, but it'd be tough to tell if you're pregnant just based on that, right? Because the LH spike is also high, so you could have just be ovulating right then. So that's not a great way to do it. And prolactin, that has nothing to do with implementation. The answer to this question is actually HCG. After successful implementation, the developing embryo will secrete HCG, which maintains the corpus luteum and supports the production of progesterone and estrogen. Elevated HCG levels are a key indicator of pregnancy and are actually what your pregnancy tests are detecting. Now let's do one more here. If the corpus luteum fails to degenerate, so it's still there, and continues to secrete progesterone, which of the following is most likely to occur? Delayed menstruation, early onset of menstruation, increased FSH levels, or decreased endometrial thickness? Well, we want to think about what the corpus luteum is doing. And progesterone. We know progesterone is increasing the endometrial thickness. So immediately, I'm going to get rid of D because that's just so far the opposite. Increased FSH levels? Probably not. That would be a positive feedback loop, which doesn't happen with progesterone. So we'll get rid of C. So now we're with two tricky answers. Delayed menstruation or early onset of menstruation? Well, since we are secreting progesterone, that means we have recently ovulated. And if we've just ovulated, we're probably not going to have menstruation very quickly. Normally, we see menstruation come up when progesterone levels start going down. So progesterone is still going up. We are actually going to be delaying menstruation. If the corpus luteum persists and continues to secrete progesterone, it can delay the onset of menstruation by maintaining the endometrial lining. This condition is known as a luteal cyst or a persistent corpus luteum and can cause irregular menstrual cycles. So we covered a lot in this video, but implantation is the attachment of a blastocyst to the uterine wall, which is mediated by estrogen and progesterone. If implantation does not occur, then the decline in these hormones will trigger menstruation, the shedding of the endometrium. Understanding these hormonal regulation and key events of implantation and menstruation are absolutely crucial for success on the MCAT, specifically the Biochem sections. So we've made a set of 4 videos on this. I 100% recommend you watch to make sure you absolutely rock this exam. I want to thank you so much for watching our final one in the series, Implantation and Menstruation, and I will see you next time.